In 1980, Richard Pryor infamously set himself on fire. The horrific tragedy immediately made news, but few know the truth about that dark night. Jerry Seinfeld called him the Picasso of our profession, while Chris Rock labeled him as comedy's Rosa Parks. But those titles don't tell the whole story of who Richard Pryor was, or what it took for him to get where he did. Buckle up as we travel back in time and learn how a poor kid made it big, without ever completely escaping his demons. You know how they say a mother is a child's first teacher, and by extension, the home is a child's first school? Well, unfortunately, Richard Pryor's troubles started from the moment he arrived in the world. His mother was a sex worker, and he was born in a house run by his grandmother. His dad was an ex-boxer and hustler, who also worked as a pimp. It's hard to say what traumatized young Pryor the most. On one occasion, he found a lifeless baby in a shoebox. The boy also regularly saw people fighting with each other in the bar next door. He spied on his mom and her colleagues while they were working, and even witnessed his mother attack his father with a knife. Even after all this, somehow the worst was yet to come. When Pryor was only 7 years old, a teenager inappropriately touched him. Then, when Pryor was just 14, a Catholic priest victimized him once again. Pryor had an incredibly dark childhood. However, he realized the power of laughter early on. One day, he discovered he could make the women he lived with laugh when he kept falling off a railing of bricks on purpose. But the best part for him was when he slipped and fell in dog poo. This made his usually stern grandmother laugh. As Pryor said, this was his first joke. Richard Pryor used to be late for school a lot, until one of his teachers had an epiphany that would change his life forever. She told him she'd let him perform for the class for 10 minutes every week if he showed up on time. This was great motivation. Young Richard loved doing slapstick routines for his classmates. It was an early sign of his unstoppable comedic talents. However, for every mentor who stood up for Pryor, it seemed like a dozen more let him down. Case in point, his own parents. When Pryor was only 10 years old, his mother abandoned him. Even worse, some sources say she left when Pryor was just 5 years old, and that she had to leave because her husband beat her so viciously. In the end, Pryor's tough grandmother stepped up and cared for the little boy. Being the class clown helped Pryor realize that he loved performing to an audience. Luckily for him, a local director cast him in a community center performance of Rumpelstiltskin. The director of the show was a fairy godmother of sorts because she recognized Pryor's talents and encouraged him to believe in himself. Sadly, these happy times wouldn't last long. As if Pryor's life wasn't full of enough upheavals already, his ex-girlfriend got pregnant and gave birth to their child in 1957. At the time of his daughter's birth, Pryor was still a child himself, clocking in at only 16 years old. And here's the real kicker, the mother of Pryor's child wasn't exclusively seeing Pryor. She was also involved with Pryor's father. Considering the kind of home environment Pryor came from, it wasn't surprising that he got into a lot of trouble at school. Eventually, the administrators simply couldn't handle Pryor's antics and expelled him when he was 14. Unsure about what to do, Pryor worked odd jobs that came his way. He became a janitor and joined the army as soon as he turned 18. He hoped the forces would give him stability, but they only made Pryor's life even more chaotic. Pryor was stationed in West Germany almost as soon as he joined the forces in 1958. Unfortunately, he didn't remain in active duty for too long before getting into a fight. A white officer provoked Pryor and several other black officers with offensive comments. They beat him up badly, even using a knife to hurt him. Thankfully, none of the wounds were fatal, but Pryor still spent the next 2 years behind bars. After he returned from his stint with the US forces, Pryor decided he wanted to marry and settle down. He married Patricia Price from his hometown in Illinois, but their romance went sour fast. The couple had a child named Richard Jr. However, by the time the baby took his first breaths, his parents had already called it quits. It was the first of Pryor's 6 failed marriages. After his eventful time with the forces, Pryor wisely switched gears and pursued life as a performer. He began performing in various Midwestern clubs and enjoyed seeing the audiences respond to his jokes. Well, there was no looking back from this point. Pryor knew if he wanted to make it big, he had to move out of his comfort zone. He packed his bags and headed to New York in search of fame and fortune. Pryor got a chance to open for Nina Simone soon after reaching New York. Later on, The legendary singer remembered how scared Pryor was, saying he shook like he had malaria. Simone had to put her arms around Pryor and rock him to calm him down, and that wasn't the only time that Pryor's nerves manifested. He had no sense of his own comic voice and admitted that he just emulated Bill Cosby. Unfortunately, what started as an homage led to a total breakdown. One day, Pryor went on stage in front of a full house in Vegas and realized that he felt like a fraud. He abruptly left in the middle of the show and vowed to discover his own comedic voice. He spent some time in San Francisco, taking in counterculture and finding inspiration in poets and revolutionaries. Unfortunately, other people influenced him in less inspiring ways. There are conflicting stories about how and when Pryor started his lifelong, dangerous affair with illicit substances. However, he became incredibly addicted to it when he spent time with Red Fox, the owner of a small comedy club in LA. After his tour through California, Pryor returned to stand up very much his own man, with a distinct voice. He channeled all his pain and dark experiences into edgy comedy routines, and the audiences loved it. However, just as his career was finally taking off, Pryor's personal life was in the middle of a spectacular nosedive. Pryor was quite the player. In 1967, his ex-girlfriend gave birth to his daughter, Elizabeth Ann. Then, in the same year, Pryor married for the second time, not walking down the aisle with the mother of his child, but with his new girlfriend, the struggling actress Shelley Bonus. In the same year that he and Bonus welcomed a daughter, they parted ways. The man clearly stayed busy. It wasn't only struggling actresses who caught Pryor's eye, though. He dated famous women like Superman actress Margot Kidder and Pam Grier. While both women described their relationships with Pryor as fiery, his romances usually ended for two main reasons. He couldn't keep it in his pants, and his increasing substance addiction, and poor Pam would learn this the hard way. While Grier's relationship with Pryor had its dark times, it also produced a lot of love and growth for the couple. Grier helped Pryor see his worth, which was no easy task given his struggles with depression and self-doubt. And that wasn't all. Pryor was also illiterate and had to learn his lines by sounding them out. Grier stepped in and taught him to read. However, it's safe to say the drama outweighed the heartwarming moments. Pryor had struggled with addiction for years at this point, so when he relapsed after a few months of sobriety, Grier was disappointed, but not shocked. Here's when Pryor officially went too far. In 1977, while he and Grier were still in a serious relationship, he began an affair with another woman. Then, he impregnated his mistress. And then, to top it all off, he married her. All of this happened while Grier believed that she and Pryor were still a couple. Stunningly, after all this, Grier wasn't even the one to dump Pryor, he dumped her. Pryor's tragic past kept rearing its ugly head and affecting his relationships. Perhaps because he'd seen only violence associated with women while he was growing up, he couldn't separate it from his own love life. He often beat his wives and girlfriends, and subsequently, few of his romances lasted very long. That didn't stop Pryor from trying, though. He married 5 women a total of 7 times, which means that, yes, he married 2 of his wives twice. In his biography, Pryor revealed that for at least 2 weeks, he fooled around with a transgender woman who looked like Josephine Baker. After that, though, he went back to life as a heterosexual. But there would be more shocking revelations about Pryor's bedroom-based activities later. Musician and producer Quincy Jones made a startling disclosure after Pryor's passing. He had an affair with Marlon Brando. Although Pryor's daughter, Rain, denied the existence of such a relationship, his widow, Jennifer Lee, confirmed it was true. She stated that Pryor didn't consider it shameful and said it wasn't a big deal in the 70s. At this time, Pryor transitioned into acting and instantly made an impact, especially with his role in Billie Holiday's biopic starring Diana Ross. He appeared in several other films as well, including the box office hit Superman 3, where he earned more than Christopher Reeve.
Why keep you around?
Yeah, I've been thinking that I'm not making enough money for this gig.
Yes.
And Stir Crazy. However, when the cameras weren't rolling, Pryor's behavior wasn't so entertaining. People who worked with him on Stir Crazy admitted that he could be rude and disrespectful. He made over-the-top demands, like wanting someone to fly him to and from the set in a special helicopter. He even had the producers fire a camera operator because he imagined the man had insulted him. But maybe there was a darker reason behind Pryor's paranoid behavior. After his introduction to substances a few years before, Pryor never really tried to curb his craving for it. Gene Wilder, his co-star in Stir Crazy, later admitted that he hadn't realized Pryor's behavior might have been a result of his ongoing addiction. Eventually, Pryor's addiction came back to bite him. After Stir Crazy, Pryor could have had another career-defining role as the lead in Blazing Saddles, which he helped Mel Brooks write. However, Warner Bros. Refused to cast Pryor because of his addiction. His habit was so notoriously destructive that the studio couldn't guarantee that he'd even be able to make it through filming. Did this reality check encourage Pryor to seek help? Unfortunately, quite the contrary. Pryor was never a one-woman man, so though he'd been dating model Deborah Maguire on and off for 4 years before they tied the knot in 1977, he was also seeing other people. In fact, he spent the night before his wedding with Jennifer Lee, who would later become wife number 4 and 7. However, this wasn't why Maguire would file for divorce just 4 months after they walked down the aisle. Shortly after their wedding, Pryor and Maguire had a New Year's party at their place. Things heated up between Maguire's friends and Pryor, but initially everyone thought it was just a joke. Clearly, Pryor didn't agree. He ordered everyone to leave his home, then fired some shots at one of Maguire's friends' Mercedes. Thankfully, the car was empty, but that didn't mean Pryor would get off scot-free. Officers booked Pryor for assault after the incident, and the chaos ultimately led to the end of his third marriage.
Then the police came. I went in the house because they got magnums too.
Although the couple claimed to still feel deep love for each other, Maguire stated that there was no going back after what happened. She also lamented the fact that Pryor couldn't control his temper. In her words, he waits until something gets under his skin so bad that he blows up. Pryor's kids weren't his top priority at first, but they became important to him after he and Maguire separated. Only Renee, age 20, lived with him at the time, as the other children lived with their mothers. As a way to make amends and get to know his offspring, Pryor took them all to Europe that summer. But even deep love for his kids wouldn't be strong enough to keep him from making a heartbreaking choice. In 1980, Pryor's dependence on substances had reached an all-time high. And to make matters worse, he was also drinking a lot of vodka every day. His grandmother's passing that year left him in a dark place. One June evening, while using, he poured rum over himself and set his entire body on fire. Pryor instantly went up in flames. Horrified once he'd realized what he'd done, Pryor desperately jumped out of the window. His family rushed to his room to see what happened, but it was already too late. Before they could do anything, Pryor was already running down the street. Officers finally caught up with him and took him to the hospital, where doctors tended to the second and third degree burns that covered more than half of his body. Pryor's body would keep warning him to take care of himself and change his lifestyle. However, for too long, he just didn't listen. The comedian had his first heart attack in 1977 and his second one in 1990. He also went through triple bypass surgery a year later in 1991. Sadly, when it came to Pryor's health struggles, that was just the beginning. Pryor's fourth wife, Jennifer Lee, was the woman he'd been with the night before his third wedding. This marriage lasted all of a year because Lee could not tolerate her husband's bad habits. They married in 1981, some months after Pryor's fiery accident, and though he tried to stay clean, he soon relapsed. After that, Lee felt that leaving was her only option. After years of torment, Pryor finally kicked his substance addiction in 1983. After that, things seemed to go well. His career revived, and he married his fifth wife, the aspiring actress Flynn Belaine. In 1986, however, because this is Richard Pryor, they divorced only 1 year after tying the knot, and then everything in his personal life got even crazier than usual. Buckle up, because this one's a doozy. Shortly after their divorce, Pryor and his recent ex-wife, Belaine, got back together. However, Pryor was also seeing someone else at the time, leading Pryor to welcome not one, but 2 babies with 2 different women in a single year. He had a boy with his girlfriend Geraldine Mason and a girl with his ex-wife/current girlfriend Belaine. And that's not all. Belaine and Pryor then made another attempt to get married. They tied the knot again in 1990, but realized they weren't meant to be together and finally divorced in 1991. A horrific voice from Pryor's past came back to haunt him. Many years after his tragic childhood, a now famous Pryor visited his hometown. His molester came to see him and brought his son along, asking for an autograph. Although it couldn't have been easy, Pryor signed the autograph as he thought, "I pray to God his son doesn't have to go through what I did." Towards the late 80s, people noticed Pryor was losing a lot of weight and began to wonder if he had AIDS. Thankfully he didn't, but even so, his ailment wasn't much better. Pryor had multiple sclerosis. He would fight against the disease for the rest of his life. After his diagnosis, Pryor called Lee his fourth ex-wife. She said that he told her his life was a mess and asked her to help him. So Lee moved back to LA and helped him downsize from a huge rental to a more suitable place for both of them. She took care of him as his disease took his toll on him, and married him in 2001. They remained together until his passing in 2005. In some ways, Pryor considered MS to be a blessing in disguise, because it helped him slow down and take time for himself. However, there was no denying the havoc it wreaked on his body. He tried to continue doing stand-up in the 90s, but his poor health was evident. His last film appearance was in 1997's Lost Highway, where he used a power-operated scooter to help him get around.
Wonderful.
Good to see you, man.
Really, man.
Good
A
to
lot
see
of
you.
people gonna be real happy that you're back, including.
Here's the saddest part of Pryor's MS diagnosis. Eventually, it impacted his body so profoundly that the quick-witted comedian could barely speak. Pryor made his silent exit from the world in December 2005, just 9 days after his 65th birthday. According to Lee, he breathed his last breath with a smile on his face. It was a third heart attack that finally did him in. Lee spread her husband's ashes in Hawaii, as Pryor had wanted. There's no denying the influence Pryor's brand of humor had on comedians following his footsteps. Filmmaker Damon Wayans and comedian Dave Chappelle are both huge fans, while multiple publications rated Pryor as the greatest stand-up comedian of all time. In 2015, artist Preston Jackson created a life-size bronze statue of Pryor. It stands in Pryor's hometown. Pryor hosted the Academy Awards as the first African-American to do so. He played the first African-American stock car racing champion in Grease Lightning. He and Gene Wilder were Hollywood's first interracial comedy duo, and he was the first recipient of the Mark Twain Award for American Humor. He famously said that he felt pride at being able to use humor to lessen people's hatred. Pryor was also the first African-American to sign a deal with Columbia worth $40 million, and the first black person to host SNL. Richard Pryor infamously set himself on fire, but few people realized he didn't do it just because he was under the influence. According to his wife, Pryor was attempting to end his life when he doused himself in rum and struck a match. For all his faults, Pryor had his heart in the right place. He stood up for gay rights and really loved animals. PETA honored him for saving baby elephants in Botswana, targeted for circuses. He even wrote to Barnum & Bailey's circus's ringmaster to urge him to consider if it was honorable to preside over suffering animals. After his MS diagnosis, he remained a staunch advocate against animal testing, even though the testing might have meant getting closer to a cure for his condition. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.